Welcome to today's webinar on overhead door safety put on by the Motor Safety Association. During today's webinar, we'll do a brief introduction on what is overhead door safety, and we'll leave you with some guidelines and general maintenance around overhead doors, as well as go over some various incidents that have been associated with overhead doors. And there's some pretty neat safeguards and products that can be used to maximize safety around overhead doors at your business or facility, and we'll touch on those, as well as look at any conclusions with various questions that may have arisen. A little bit about us at the Motor Safety Association. What I'll do is, many of you have been to our webinars in the past. I just want you to refer to our website, www.motorsafety.ca, if you do have any questions, or feel free to check us up on our Twitter handle at the bottom of the screen. So let's get started and look at the introduction for overhead doors safety. And when we started this webinar project, there really wasn't a whole lot of information compiled on overhead door safety. And we didn't have to look very far. I just had to look out the front door of our office and I could see 12 overhead doors. And in our industry, there has to be thousands of overhead doors. And through our discussions with some of the dealerships, they have told us about an incident or a close call that they had with an overhead door at their facility. And a lot of times property damage is the most common that has arisen, but we have heard of injuries where people have tried to fix their own overhead doors. So the goal of today's webinar is to give you some information about overhead door safety that you can be aware of at your dealership. And when we looked at the WCB statistical information, in Saskatchewan since 2010, there have been 52 Workers' Compensation Board claims due to doors in our industry. And the most of those actually came from agricultural dealerships. In the USA, I found a stat dating back to 2003, there were 17,800 non-fatal door incidents reported to OSHA, which is the Occupational Safety and Health Association in the United States. So they had a huge amount of overhead door non-fatal incidents that have arisen. So we know this is a huge problem that is before us. And when I was speaking to a dealership, they were telling me about a very situation that happened to them where a near miss had occurred. And what happened was a technician drove their tractor into the dealership and left it parked partially in the doorway. And at that dealership, they were using door opener switches, and someone had accidentally pushed one of the remote switches. It was in their pocket, and it activated the opener. This caused the door to come down, and once it hit the tractor, basically the door kept trying to come down, and the opener shaft was turning, and what happened was the cable for the door ended up wrapping around the shaft and causing a big jam and a bit of a concern to the overhead door where it wouldn't work anymore. And of course this happened at 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, and the supervisor had urged the staff to try to get that door closed. And this door had an overriding chain that you can use the chain to either lower or raise the door within its track. So the technician yanked and jerked on this chain, and eventually the cable snapped that was wrapped around the roller. And the whole overhead door assembly came out of the track, nearly contacting the technician. So this was something that could have been a whole lot worse. It led to some property damage, but no one was hurt. But when something like this happens, take a look. Could this happen at your dealership or your business? And that's why we compiled this information today, because there wasn't a whole lot of information out there on overhead door safety, and we were hearing of these near misses. And we had the information about claims that have occurred as well. So I'm going to give you now some general guidelines around overhead door safety. And I've been working with a dealership group in southwestern Saskatchewan, and what they had done was when they set up their business and their overhead doors in their dealership, instead of having just a quick one-touch push on the wall-mounted switches, they had it reprogrammed so that you had to apply constant pressure on that switch in order for that door to close. And they found that this worked good because they could stand there and they could take a look. So when they were closing that door, they could ensure that no one or nothing was coming in the doorway, or there was nothing laying or obstructing the doorway. So that's a practice that they had utilized, which they've been quite happy with. Another guideline is do not leave your door partially open or closed, as this increases tension on the spring and it can fail. Sometimes we see that various months of the year, perhaps in the hot summer days, people open the door a little bit just to allow hopefully a draft to come through the bottom of the door. And what happens is the door initially wasn't designed to be held at that position. The spring it works the best when it's held at either the open position on the door or the closed position. It's not meant to hold the door at a position in between that. So keep that in mind as a guideline. And some dealerships have implemented an in-store policy that they do not allow their staff to walk through overhead doorways when the overhead door is open, and they require them to use the man or walk-in door because the overhead door is a suspended load over them in its tracks. Another guideline to be aware of is the wind and vacuum pressure. If you have a long building and you have overhead doors on both sides of it, and one of the doors is open and the wind's funneling in, and you're trying to open or close the other door, it's going to cause the door to shimmy inside of the tracks, and the panels will start to shake, which could cause it to come out of the track. So just be aware of the wind and vacuum pressure. And when the door is moving, steer clear of the doorway. Don't try to slide underneath it or to get out of the building as the door is closing. And another important point is do not try to remove, repair, adjust the springs or anything to which the spring parts are fastened. So that spring is under constant pressure. So again, that would be something that a certified door repair person would look at. And in the event your door would become hard to operate or inoperative, it is recommended that you seek the help of a qualified door technician to be contacted. Do not use your in-dealership staff to repair your overhead doors unless they have been trained to do so. But for the most part, we haven't seen a lot of dealership staff, if any, been trained and certified to work on overhead doors. Another point to consider is operate the door only when properly adjusted and free of obstructions. Ensure that the air compressor hose is not running along in the doorway, or the pressure washer hose, or the wand. So just want to make sure that doorway is clear. And your door is under extreme spring tension, and these repairs and adjustments should be performed by a qualified door service repair person. Again, don't use your in-house staff for those repairs. And don't stand in an open doorway or walk through it while the door is moving. As I said before, sometimes people try to rush into the facility as the door is either closing or opening, and they bend over at a 90-degree angle and they got their back twisted. If that door were ever to come down, it would cause permanent damage to that person. And something to be aware of, as you folks know in the dealership business or working in service departments, that the machines and equipment you look after requires periodic maintenance and service intervals. And overhead doors are no exception. They require upkeep and maintenance. However, the frequency of this maintenance does vary on the manufacturer's recommendations, as well as the frequency of door usage. A practice that some dealer groups have got into is they've implemented a monthly in-house inspection that they check their overhead doors over every month. And some places have then set up a process where they bring in a certified door repair agency every year to look at the overhead doors and maintain them on a yearly basis to ensure that they're operating safely. And I do apologize, I know this slide is hard to see, but this is just an example of what a maintenance guideline safety decal would look like. And we've seen these decals placed inside the overhead door or along the track or near where the switch is mounted. And it really reiterates what I was mentioning about not to go under a moving door, to stay away from it when the door is moving, and not to adjust or tamper with that high tension spring. So what I'm saying is when you see these decals, just to be aware of the decals and to follow what they are saying and take notice of that safety information on them. So I did mention a couple slides back about a monthly inspection and some ways you can do a monthly inspection at your dealership of your overhead doors are you stand inside of the shop when the overhead door is closed, and you can look over the door springs, cables, rollers, pulleys and hinges. So you're basically looking at any of the moving parts, just checking for damages or frayed cables. Perhaps you may have heard a sound that didn't quite sound right, and so you just want to you want to take a good look to make sure that everything is in fact proper amongst your checklist. And if you do require a monthly inspection checklist, we have compiled a list that we've sourced some information from operators' manuals and have made a checklist for overhead doors. So feel free to email us, which I'll provide our email address again at the end of this presentation, as it was on the first introduction slides, to contact us if you would like one of those checklists. So in addition to that monthly in-house check that you can do a monthly reverse mechanism test if your door is so equipped with the reverse mechanism. So now with your door fully open, you can use a very low profile cardboard box. So use something that's actually lower than the height of your eye-mounted sensors if you have photo eyes. So then you would close the door, and if the door hits the cardboard box and then rises and goes up, then you know your reverse mechanism is working. If your door hits the box and crushes it and keeps on going till the door is closed, then you know that your reverse mechanism is not working. A similar test you could do with your photo eyes. If you place a large cardboard box in between in the open doorway so that the two eyes cannot see each other, that will stop your door from closing, as well as if you were to obstruct one of the eyes in a different fashion, it will keep once the eye signal is blocked, one eye from the other, the door will reverse. So if either of those tests do fail, be sure to contact your door service technician. So reverse mechanisms, there are some various different kinds available that you can utilize at your business. And what this does is a door that stops on impact or has a reversing mechanism that retracts upward or only a few inches, just enough to take the load off, can help minimize risk. Because if you have the reverse mechanism that goes all the way up to the top, so just picture if someone was working near the door and they got a piece of their coveralls or something caught into the door, and all of a sudden the door lifts all the way up. So now that person is caught dangling from the overhead door as it is lifted. So that's why a reverse mechanism that only lifts upward a few inches is a lot better to have in place than ones that retract all the way to the up position if the event of they were tripped in that setting for reverse testing. So as a rule, there's generally three categories where we see the most incidents associated with overhead doors. Now the next slides, we will go over these three categories. There's entrapment, downward impact, and secondary impact. And I just want to show you, you can see that I highlighted where the man door is, and I have an arrow beside it, or the walk-in door. So again, that's the door that you should utilize when you are entering or exiting through into the service departments. So let's talk a little bit about entrapment. So the entrapment occurs when a person or object is in the doorway and there's a continued downward force from the overhead door. So that door is continuously pushing down because it's trying to close and the person can't get out. And that's something that if there's no reverse mechanism or safety switch in place, that would be something that could occur because that door is going to push down and try to entrap that person. Then there's downward impact, and this is actually the most frequent that we see in industrial environments, perhaps where a door crashes into a piece of equipment and causes damages to it. And looking at some research, the new generation of industrial doors could be a lot different than what we're used to seeing. The lower panel, some suppliers have made it out of a soft leading edge, and they have sensors built into it. And what I could show you on this slide here is the picture on the right. As you can see, they have a ball underneath the door panel, and the door panel itself is molded around that ball, therefore minimizing property damage. So this lower panel, it's weighted and it's heavy enough to pull the door curtain down, yet it's flexible enough to minimize impact and minimize damages to a piece of equipment or a person. So it is quite flexible, and it does really distribute the load that it does inflict on. So that's a pretty neat feature as well that we may be able to see more of in the future. There is then secondary impact, and this occurs when there is a door impact and the door returns upward with the worker caught in the door, pulling worker up with the door. And that's kind of what I mentioned before. If someone is working around the doorway and they get caught in one of the hinges or amongst the panel, and that door reverses all the way to the top, the secondary impact has caused that person to be stuck or caught in the doorway itself, and now they're again dangling from the overhead doorway. And this is a huge problem because doors open much faster than they close. So if you're caught, it's going to go up there in an awful hurry. So again, those reverse mechanisms that only raise a few inches do work best to minimize secondary impact. So I'm going to touch a bit on some various safeguards and products for overhead doors. And I'm not endorsing or promoting any of the specific products that come forward as far as safety guards for overhead doors or safety edges. I just want to showcase a few of them in this webinar to give you some information, to do some research, to see what would work best at your dealership or facility. This one being a pneumatic safety edge. And how this works is there is basically an air diaphragm pressure switch that is in the bottom skirting of the door within the safety edge. And this is inflated to a certain amount of pressure by air. And when this is compressed or contracted, the tube itself flattens when it is compressed, and therefore it causes the door to reverse. And you can see by the arrow at the bottom of the door, so this is where the sensor would be, and it's built into the door panel in the bottom skirting itself. So that's something that is available on the market. I did hear some limitations to this product. Perhaps if you have a lot of snow or mud or dirt or debris that builds up in your doorway, then the door sensor, the pneumatic safety edge, may not work as well. So again, no fault of the switch, but if there is that buildup underneath the doorway, it won't work properly. So similar to the pneumatic safety edge, there's actually an optical electronic sensing edge. And this one is basically made up with a light transmitter and a light receiver. So just picture a ray of light trying to go across the whole width of this bottom sensing edge. And if at any point the light beam is interrupted, the sensing circuit is activated and therefore causing the door to reverse. So that is something that can be used as another option for a sensing edge on the bottom of an overhead door. So either of these safety edges that can be used do need to be inspected and maintained as per the manufacturer's recommendations. They will have certain capabilities, and it is important to follow those manufacturers' recommendations to ensure they are tested and working properly. I'm going to talk a bit about overhead door sensors again. And I'm going to look at these eye sensors. And as you can see on the bottom left picture, you can see where the two eye sensors are, and they're trying to look at each other. and there's a little tricycle in the way. So this door will not, it is reversing because that tricycle is in the way and it's obstructed that sensor to work. So what some dealerships have actually done was, so they have these sensors that are mounted low, they've added a second set about closer to the top. So they have a low set and a high set. And an example would be is, say if they pull a grain auger into their facility and they're working on the lower intake of the grain auger while it's in the facility, and the discharge end is hanging out the doorway, well, its wheels are inside of the shop, not near where the eye sensor would be. So the eye sensor would still work because the wheels of the grain auger are inside of the shop, but the discharge end is hanging out the door. So with that in place, having a second set of eye sensors is going to help minimize that potential of that door coming down, because the eye sensors' vision of each other would be obstructed. So there's a possibility of using an eye sensor and either the electric safety edge or the pneumatic safety edge as a means of doing what you can to add those extra safeguards in place for your overhead door system. A little bit to mention around door opener remotes. When you use these remotes, be sure that the button cannot be pushed accidentally. So don't leave it in your pocket or somewhere that's when you're moving around or you reach into your pocket, you activate that opener door, because what if someone is working through there or passing through it? So I kind of have mixed feelings when I see dealerships where technicians have the opener remotes. They each have a set and they carry it around with them. Well, it's not really the best practice. Some places they leave them mounted on their forklift, and that's fine because it's mounted in an area that people have to reach to contact it. So they're not just pushing that switch unless they really mean to do so. So keep that in mind if you use door remote switches. A little bit about door springs, and this is a critical point. Never ever attempt to service, repair, replace, or adjust overhead door springs. So these springs are wound up under constant pressure, and some manufacturers, they have a shield over the spring. And as soon as an untrained person tries to remove that shield or replace it for whatever reason would be, the door spring can release, and therefore causing serious injury. So the hardware that mounts that shield onto the spring is directly related to the spring pressure. And a lot of people don't realize that. That's kind of what happened to this dealership here in Saskatchewan, which was fined $33,600. Basically, the charges stemmed from a serious injury to a worker that occurred on March 26, 2010 at an equipment dealership in Saskatoon. A worker climbed a stepladder to fix an overhead door spring guard that had been bent. After loosening the bolts to the guard, the door struck the stepladder and the worker fell to the concrete floor. So that was a very serious situation that occurred, and one that has changed that worker's life forever. Due to this head injury, this worker now has many doctor visits and challenges that has happened to him since this injury date in 2010, and he's still plagued by these challenges that have come from trauma to the head from a fall like that. And I'm not sure or not if this person still holds his position at the dealership. So it did significantly change that person's life, which is very tragic. We'll talk a bit about door barriers, and these door barriers can be used to prevent impact to the doors and prevent customers from entering your dealership as well. So if you have a system like this in place, it's going to keep sometimes the people that you may not want to enter your facility from getting in. And it also does look a lot more professional instead of just a chain with a snap that's hanging on it to limit the access. So these are a couple options for door barriers. There's also an overhead door barrier, and how these work are the uprights are anchored down directly to the concrete floor, and it has a replaceable wooden beam across the top. And this basically acts as a warning for forklift operators or people who are going in and out of that door with higher pieces of equipment. So it's not a stop, but what will happen is if they were to hit it, it is a replaceable 4x4 piece of lumber, which is easier to replace than structural damage to the side of your building or to your overhead door area. So that is another barrier that people can utilize as well in their facilities. Bifolding doors, I'll touch on briefly, and how these work are, this is a picture of the inside of the door on the right-hand side. There's motors and a shaft. And what happens is the motors turn and the shaft winds up the cables or straps together, therefore pulling the two halves of the door together, allowing it to open. So with a system like that, be aware of moving parts, because there's going to be a lot of moving parts on the inside of the door. And again, be aware of that suspended load. When that door is opening, you got this huge suspended load hanging out the front of your building. And as you can see by the picture, there's an arrow indicating where the walk-in door is. So use that. Never walk underneath a suspended load, such as you would see in this here picture on the left from when a bifolding door is opening like that. Swing post doors. We sometimes see these at dealership or facilities. So if you have a tractor, instead of opening a large door, you can get it through the small door, so people can go through and just open one small door to get through a smaller piece of equipment. But if they're bringing in perhaps a combine with a straight cut header on it, they're going to have to wheel up both of those doors, and that center post, it either swings up out of harm's way, or there is a slide that you can, it's almost like a barn door slide. You can just slide that top pillar out of the way. What I just want you guys to be aware of is these doors too, since there are more moving parts to them, just be aware of the manufacturer's recommendations and to respect the service intervals and maintenance for this type of door as well. Washbay doors sometimes seem to be overlooked within a dealership or facility. And what happens is, if the incorrect doors are used in wash bays, water seeps into the door panels, whether it be through various cracks or points that the water can get into it, and therefore it increases the weight of the door. So just imagine an overhead door that's in use in your wash bay area that over time has been, water has been seeping into it and it's being absorbed into the door panel. Now the weight of this door has greatly increased and it exceeds what that spring capacity is for the door. So it's just a matter of time before that causes failure and causes a situation at your dealership or facility. So be sure you are using the correct doors in your wash bays, and you want to contact your overhead door supplier to ensure that you are in fact using those correct doors in the wash bays and ones that aren't in fact absorbing or seeping water into them, therefore increasing the weight of the door and exceeding the spring capacity. Another little system that can be used is this overhead door lock. And this basically will lock your door in the full up position or in the closed position. And this prevents the door from unexpectedly coming slamming down. So it protects personnel, product, and equipment. So that's a handy low-cost device that people can utilize to lock their door in either the open or closed position. This one here is a steel guard door track protector, and this prevents damage to overhead door tracks, resulting door operation problems caused by equipment and machinery impacts. So if we were to bump into our door tracks, it's going to twist, and then our door isn't going to run true anymore. So these low-profile tracks mounted to the floor, and they do absorb that door impact from the front and the sides, which helps prevent that damage to the door tracks. So that might be something you may want to consider using at your dealership or facility. What I will mention as well is professional services. The door service repair people, they can do a lot to help you out at your business for the maintenance and upkeep of your door. They can clean the door to prevent dirt and debris and from clogging up and causing premature wear. So they know where to clean those high wear items. as well as lubrication. They can ensure that they get the lubricant in the correct place, therefore reducing wear, reducing moisture and corrosion. So that's critical to the maintenance and upkeep of your overhead doors. And they can also do those adjustments to make sure that your door is running smoothly and consistently and efficiently every time. They can also do inspections. And by doing the inspection, these folks are trained, so they can look for those small problems before they turn into large ones. So that's something that the professional services can do for you as well. And they will give you documentation or due diligence as proof of what work has been completed on your overhead doors. And as mentioned, some dealer groups bring professional service agencies in every year to go through all of their doors to ensure that they are working properly. So again, make sure to utilize those folks. Do not try to fix your own door. I can't emphasize enough how important that is. But if and when you do bring the professional services onto your site, these people are deemed as contractors. So when you're bringing a contractor on site, be sure you contact your local workers' compensation board to get a letter of good standing before they start working at your site, and a WCB clearance letter before you pay them. Because what happens is if these professional door companies do not have WCB coverage, and if a situation were to occur, this would then become onto your WCB account opposed to theirs. So again, just a little tip to keep in mind when you are bringing door service repair personnel on site or any other contractors for that matter. A couple resources I'll leave you with today. There's a couple of websites. One's called the International Door Association, and this is a group that basically they look after the design of most overhead doors, as well as a lot of safety information and procedures. I was able to compile a lot of their data into this webinar today. So feel free to contact those people at the International Door Association if you do have more questions related to the specific safety around overhead doors, as well as Spring Service Corp, and I did include their website as well. So they are a company that they look after the design of the spring services for overhead doors, so they can know how much capacity and the requirements to place the correct spring at your facility. So again, these are two great resources that you can utilize for more information. So as we conclude today, all attendees will receive a webinar certificate template. Feel free to fill your name in and print it into the certificate. I will also send you a sample poster that you can put on your safety board, which goes over some of the common points around overhead doors and maintenance. So you want to keep that handy on your safety board, as well as that inspection checklist that I promised. So those will be things that you will see emailed to you after the webinar. You'll also receive an evaluation survey to provide feedback. And that feedback is helpful in allowing us to develop good webinars for you in the future. And we're always looking for great webinar topics. So if there are other topics at your dealership, safety related, that you'd like more information on, please let us know so we can develop that into a webinar for future dates. With that being said, this concludes our webinar today on overhead door safety. And I'll leave our phone number up on the screen, as well as our website address. Our email address is listed here, and again, these are good ways to get a hold of us if you do have questions along overhead door safety and maintenance. Our next webinar date is scheduled for February 17th, 2016, and we are looking for that topic. So if you do have a topic, please bring it forward. With that, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to listen to today's webinar on overhead door safety.